Okay, I turned on the recording, so Laura's not surprised. I waited until you paused in a sentence before I turned it on.
I feel like every one of the podcasts you have me appear on starts the same way with us talking about how you hit record.
Yeah, well,
I
I have to note that I'm doing it. It's
I
part of my
wonder how
OCD.
it feels to the listeners.
I yeah, I don't know.
The
Vincent Faye
listener.
can tell us. Um, okay, so there's four of us here. This is the welcome to the second. I can't say inaugural because it's not the first one anymore. It's the second book club, Dialogue Doctor Book Club, and it's I'm Jeff. Everybody knows me if you're listening to this podcast. Hopefully, unless this is your first one. Um, yeah, and so I picked the book this time. I'll take full blame for it. I picked The Sun Also Rises by Ernest Hemingway. So a little about me. I write mysteries and supernatural thrillers. I hold down a full time job working for a training company that writes simulations and currently school my five children in the house because COVID. Um, but yeah, that's me. And then there's several wonderful people that agreed to to sign on to the insanity of reading The Sun Also Rises, which I really came to like. By the way, I'm just going to put that out there. I know that not everybody on the call is with me on that. I may be the only one, but I actually kind of got fond of it. Um, yeah, so let's have everybody introduce themselves. Vince, why don't you go first? Tell us name, where you're from, and what you write, and kind of what's going on in life.
My name is Vince Stanley. I live in Martinsville, Virginia. I am a stay-at-home father, and I've been writing, uh, just trying to write a novel, and thought this the sun also rises might be a fun introduction into thinking about dialogue to try to improve my writing. So happy to
Awesome,
be here.
that's great. What are you writing?
I am writing a novel. The log line is a culinary school dropout joins a brothel when she runs out of options before she can get settled. An eccentric businessman buys the brothel with the intention of mixing things up.
Oh, nice. Very like Moulin Rouge. I'm into it. That's great. All right, Faye, give us a name, where you're at in the world, what you're writing, all that kind of good stuff.
I'm Faye White. I live in Ontario, Canada. I am in the throes of arguing with a COVID novel because what else can you do on Saturdays?
Nice.
So yeah.
What? Give us a glimpse into the novel.
Superhero mom.
Nice. Love it. And it's fantastic. I've read several chapters. I'm very excited about it.
Oh, thank you.
Uh, Laura, give us an introduction. Who are you? Where are you in the world?
I'm Laura Hum. I live in Maryland, and my day job is working with Jeff. We build simulations to teach people how to talk to each other better. Um, yeah, that's I am pursuing a master's degree, and I'm not actually a writer. I am an editor. So take
Yeah,
a little different perspective on the literary world.
yeah. If Laura was editing The Sun Also Rises, she would have
If
just put no on every
Yes,
page.
Ernest and I would have had a very long conversation about the character voices in his books.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'd have to warn you, Laura, for the next novel of mine that you edit. Ernest has encouraged a lot of my bad habits.
Yes,
Um,
well, we will fix them. If I had had a paper copy, I am reading on an e-reader because my spouse hates physical books. So he bought me an e-reader several years ago. Um, but if I had had a paper copy, I likely would have edited this fine work of art.
as you read, would have been half a chapter left by the time Laura was done, which is why she's a brilliant editor.
There's some there's some really great storyline here. I just don't understand the rest of it.
Okay, let me give a brief overview of the book before we get into it too much. So, um, Jake. The book is about Jake. He's a World War One vet living in Paris. He's injured, and his injury has made him impotent, which is important to the plot of the novel. He's got a best friend named Khan, who's a Jewish, wealthy American guy, not a vet, but is an ex-boxer. Jake is desperately in love with Lady Brett Ashley, who's a very independent woman who kind of hops from man to man to man to man through the book, but is engaged to a guy named Mike, who also shows up at the end of the book. And then I think the only other huge character is Jake's friend, Bill, who is another American that shows up. And the plot kind of goes like Jake is in Paris drinking heavily with Con and Brett, and then Con and Brett leave, and Jake hangs out with Bill, and they decide to go to Spain. And on the way, they pick Con and Brett back up, along with Mike, Brett's fiance, and then they're in Paloma. This was my notes on the plot. They're in Paloma, Spain, and they watch bullfights. And Brett falls in love with a 19-year-old bullfighter named Romero.
Yeah.
Did I get that right?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Okay. Some reason I want to say Romeo, but it's not Romeo. It's Romero. Yeah, and then they watch Romero fight bulls. Khan, who is also in love with Lady Ashley, gets pissed and beats up Mike and Jake and Romero, and then leaves. Oh, by the way, spoilers. And Romero, they watch a second bullfight of Romero's, and then Jake and Brett, everyone goes their separate ways. Jake and Brett get in a cab to drive to the train because she's decided she's going back to her fiance, Mike. And Brett says, man, we would have been a great couple. And Jake's like, wait, I just read it and I don't even remember the last line. Jake says, isn't it pretty to think so? And that's the end of the novel. So before I get into like the historical, we'll do the historical stuff in a minute and like what scholars say about it. Before we do that, what did we like about the book? Anything? I like things, but I don't want to keep talking.
It was very well written. Like
you got to define well written.
Okay, the use of syntax, grammar, and language was fabulous.
Wow.
There's no grammatical errors. Man, that's awesome. Faye rates this up there with a VCR novel, like a VCR assembly.
Drunk and white.
It's really funny. So it's well written. Is there anything else we can? It's grammatically and syntaxically well written. Anything else anybody wants to say positive about it?
There was a lot of things I liked about it outside of the dialogue focus. One of the things that I was saying before we hit record was the main character's like, he's only interested in certain things, and like everything else about where they live, about Paris, about Spain, about all of it is just missing. It's like, I like cafes, only going to talk about them. I like statues. He only talks about statues. He mostly talks about alcohol. He mostly talks about like the basques that interest him. And so the nice thing is you see like a very narrow slice of the world through this, the narrator's eyes. Because I think somewhere else where I've read, Hemingway was into boxing real big, but the main character doesn't care much about boxing so much.
Yeah.
And it's fascinating. You would like, maybe if I was the author of this book, I would put more boxing like minutia into the main character, and he didn't do that. He was just like, oh yeah, Jake's a boxer, whatever.
Yeah, it's super sparse. It's super like you're saying, like there's just not a lot of like Like it takes place in all these great places, right? Like Paris and Paloma, Spain, but it's not a travel novel. It's not like you don't get a sense of what Paris is from this novel.
Right, right.
No,
There,
yeah.
it almost is more interesting what is left out.
Yeah, he
Right.
leaves. Yeah, that's a really fascinating point. I hadn't actually thought about that, but now that you're saying it, it's super true. I
So,
oh
oh,
yeah, go ahead,
no,
Laura.
no, go ahead.
No,
Go
you
ahead.
go for it. If you
So,
liked something about the book, I'm super excited to hear about it.
so while I found the book terribly, terribly painful and boring to read, I did appreciate the post-war aspect of their lives. The way that the focus was only on the drinking, only on the relationship between the core characters, and the like rumination on the same topic over and over and over and over again feels really authentic to an understanding of post-war trauma, which is kind of an interesting take, seeing that it was written in World War after World War One versus like what we now know about things like post-traumatic stress
Yeah.
and those sorts of things. But the like if we can take a step back from the story and look, like, all of these characters are suffering from depression and trauma as it relates to the war, and their experiences being so authentic to that, like that search for something that makes them feel something, was kind of what resonated to me throughout.
Yeah.
Not to
That, yeah.
say that it was enjoyable to read,
Yeah.
but I was appreciative of that.
Yeah, there was a real feeling of numbness as you kind of
Yeah.
went through
Yeah.
the journey with them.
Yeah. 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 I can totally see that. And they said I didn't know this until I started doing a post reading the book, started doing research, but it's his take on what's called the lost generation, which is like you're saying, Laura, that generation post World War One, who was all suffering from the horrors of World War One and like just couldn't figure out where to find meaning in life. A lot of the critics I read about it said that Jake's impotency is kind of Hemingway's commentary on his generation, that they're post World War One injured the whole generation and left them impotent. And so all that's left to do is kind of go from bar to bar and drink until life is over, which is where the title comes from. I also learned is that it's from the book of Ecclesiastes, where, Ecclesiastes is all about like the whole book is all about like the meaningless of life in comparison to time that passes. So the book of Ecclesiastes is kind of like I have everything, I've seen everything, I've done everything, and there's nothing left for me. And it's this, the passage he's citing in Ecclesiastes is like the sun also rises and the sun also sets. It's just like the days just keep going. It doesn't matter. Generations come, generations go. They come and they die, and a new generation will follow, and the sun just keeps going around the earth, and it doesn't really matter. So it's yeah, Laura, I think you and Faye are hitting on something really big that he's trying to get at. That I think he did. I agree. I think he did really well. Was that sense of like meaningless and like people searching for meaning and not being able to find it, and just that like desperation to catch on to something else. Yeah. Anything else we liked about it on that high note?
They drink this Jack Rose a lot, and I mixed one up for this podcast. It's actually kind of fun.
Oh, is
I
it?
wondered
Yeah.
what you were drinking in that bright red color.
Yeah, this is like, it looks like Kool-Aid on the screen. It's apple brandy, lemon juice, and grenadine, and it's super yummy. It's really
Wow.
boozy too. So I the problem is they drink so much. I was like, I'll just try everything they have. No, there's so much alcohol in here. No, there's just this one, just the Jack
Yeah,
Rose.
for the sake of your health, please don't do that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So by the
Just-
end, you'll be channeling Jack's voice.
That's awesome. Yeah, I will say the other thing I liked about it, I had an aunt who was an alcoholic. And she was like, I can even back like my memories of her in high school, she was tipsy or drunk all the time. But she just had this charm about her where like when she was, functional, you could have the most charming conversations with her. And I can remember her talking about how like, her big word was fine. Like, oh, that's so fine. And it's so, look at that painting over there. It's so fine. The way he did the details is so fine. Oh my gosh, I could just die for that painting. And reading the book, I remembered she died like 7-8 years ago, but reading the book, I could kind of remember those conversations with her. He really nails that, like, tipsy, sometimes flat out drunk, but like very interesting and charming people sitting around chatting about really nothing. Just like, but you're still like, I found myself up nights reading it, just kind of like reliving those conversations with her through this book. And I really appreciated that. I thought he nailed those scenes really well. Yeah.
Did we read the same book?
Oh, yeah. I at first I really struggled with it, but then at some point something clicked, and I was into the nothingness of it all. Yeah, and so one critic I read said, no plot, no twists, no goals for any of the characters. was It's how he summed up the book.
So
all right.
yeah, by today's standards, it's it's dated, but
Yeah. Okay, so let's transition into what we didn't like about the book. Anything you didn't like? I mean, clearly our opinions are soaring. Go ahead, Laura. You can go first.
I don't have to go first. Everybody knows how I feel about this book. I've been talking about it on every episode of the podcast since you brought it up. I don't think I have anything to say that's a surprise to anyone, except that I got to all but the 20th page from the end. So I did stick with it.
Nice.
I did. I tried to keep going.
I'm impressed.
I kept falling asleep though.
Yeah. Yeah, it's easy. It's an easy book to fall asleep to. That's super true. Yeah.
I mean, if I had to pick one thing that I found the most frustrating about it is all the characters had exactly the same voice.
Mhm.
And he dropped the dialogue tags. So I kept having to read scenes over and over because I didn't know who was saying what, but who was saying what was very important. Like the scene where Brett is telling Jake that she's leaving.
Yeah.
I had no idea who was leaving, right? So I had to read the scene like 3 times because I kept getting lost, which again didn't help me enjoy the reading experience.
No.
So
Yeah. Anything else that stood out to y'all that you were like, man, if I could ask Ernest to redo this thing, I would ask him to blank.
There was a lot of like ping pong style dialogue where he would say something real quick and then the next person would solve it. Like it was like bang, 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 bang. It was always, there was a lot of that. And that kind of wore you out a little bit.
Yeah, it was a lot.
And combined with missing dialogue tags was another problem where there was many times where I had to backtrack and actually count more than appreciate who was saying what.
mm-hmm.
yeah, because in some of the scenes, the repetition of a phrase or a word, you were trying to pick it up as it was one character, but it wasn't always just one character who was doing that. It was being repeated, you know, by more than one
Yeah.
of them.
Yeah, he has these big cast scenes where it just becomes a fog of who's talking. It becomes really difficult to track who's speaking.
I actually found that the bigger the cast, the easier it was to follow, the more definition he was able to put into the character voices.
Yeah.
It was those one-on-one conversations where both characters felt exactly the same. I think about the scene where Brett shows up at his place drunk, and there's the conversation that he has with Brett, but before that, the conversation he has with the concierge, right? Like
Mhm.
it was all written in one voice, and it should have been very different because the concierge should have been angry and frustrated that there's this drunk woman screaming to be let in. Brett's voice should have been different because she was drunk and clearly a little bit combative, and Jake had just woken up. Jake, I don't know what his name is. I have problems with letters. Makes me a really good editor. But like he just woke up, but at the same time, he just woke up to the fact that the woman he loves showed up in his place. So like there should have been some differentiation in voice, and yet it all felt like the narrator just saying what everybody said.
Yeah.
And that's where I would have sat down with good old Ernie and said, let's make this voice feel a little bit bolder, and let's make this. But to Faye's point about the numbness, my guess is Hemingway was very intentional about the numbness. If like you're seeing things through a fog,
Yeah.
it kind of dampers everything and it colors everything. So I mean, if we're talking about like literary works of art, sure, I'll give it to him. If we're talking about what I want to read ever again, we
Yeah.
are not.
We're
Like,
not. Okay, I'm going to read a little bit. This is from chapter 2. Are you guys okay if I just read a little bit so people can get a feel for what we're talking about?
Yep.
Okay, chapter 2. Hemingway has run into Kahn for the first time, Robert Kahn. So, hello, Robert. I said, did you come in to cheer me up? Would you like to go to South America, Jake? He asked. No. Why not? I don't know. I never wanted to go. Too expensive. You can see all the South America you want in Paris anyway. They're not real South Americans. They look awfully real to me. I had a boat train to catch with a week's mail stories and only half of them written. Do you know any dirt? I ask. No. None of your exalted connections getting divorces? No. Listen, Jake, if I handled both our expenses, would you go to South America with me? Why me? You can talk Spanish, and it would be more fun with two of us. No, I said. I like this town, and I go to Spain in the summertime. All my life, I've wanted to go on a trip like that, Khan said as he sat down. I'll be too old before I can ever do it. Don't be a fool, I said. You can't go anywhere. You can go anywhere you want. You've got plenty of money. I know, but I can't get started. Cheer up, I said. All the countries look just like moving pictures. But I felt sorry for him. He had it badly. I can't stand to think of my life going so fast and I'm not really living it. Nobody ever lives their life all the way. Nobody ever lives their life all the way up except the bullfighters. I'm not interested in bullfighters. That's an abnormal life. I want to go back to the country of South America. We could have a great trip. Did you ever think about going to British East Africa to shoot? No, I wouldn't like that. So it goes on. But yeah, so that's that's the big line there. Like nobody ever lives their life all the way up with the bullfighters. Is him kind of setting up the plot. So that's why I thought I'd read that passage. But you get a feel for that, like back and forth about mundane things. Like it really is a mundane conversation. But yeah, anyway. Later on, they have this line that's also important to the plot. He says, sorry. Yeah. Listen, Jake, he leaned forward on the bar. Do you ever get the feeling that all your life is going by and you're not taking advantage of it? Do you realize you'd lived nearly half the time you have to live already? Yes, every once in a while. Do you know that in about 35 years or more, we'll all be dead? What the hell, Robert? I said. What the hell? I'm serious. It's one thing I don't worry about, I said. You ought to. I've lived plenty. I've had plenty of worry. I've had plenty to worry about on one time or another. I, oh, I'm through worrying. Well, I want to go to South America. Listen, Robert, we're going to another country. Doesn't that make any difference? I've tried all of that. You can't get away from yourself by moving from one place to another. There's nothing to that. But you've never been to South America. South America, hell. If you went there the way you feel now, it would be exactly the same. This is a good town. Why don't you start living life in Paris? I'm sick of Paris and I'm sick of the quarter. Um, yeah. So anyway, that's his like intro to the theme of the book. And it's that like back and forth style. I do think it's really funny. He does that a lot where like he'll get a theme running with one of the characters and he just like brings it back up over and over and over again. And it always made me laugh. Robert's obsession with South America. Or there's a scene later in the book where Bill is talking and Bill is like, I went to this one place and I don't remember anything about it at all. And then Jake is like, you don't remember anything? And then Bill's like, well, there was this boxer there. And then he goes on with this like really elaborate story about like this fronting this boxer and giving him money and driving him around town and having to go get back the money. But then he keeps going like, but I don't remember anything about it at all. And that made me laugh.
A lot of Bill's stories are that way.
Yeah, they're just these like rambling. Yeah.
Yeah, they're like a joke, and then like Jake will want to move on, and then Bill keep the joke going. And that I took that as part of like the whole dialogue construction for the Bill character was Jake rarely makes a joke, and when he does make a joke, it's one and done. Where Bill will like riff on a joke
Yeah.
again and again.
Yeah, he'll just run with it. Yeah. And he's got some other personalities. Like Laura was saying, in the big cast scenes, you really start to see the personalities come out more. Like Mike is very insulting, and likes to take shots, especially at Robert. Robert's not too bright. He rarely picks up on the fact that he's being made fun of. Yeah, anyway, Lady Ashley's very I don't even know the word for it. Erudite? Is that the right word for it? No.
No, that word. Yeah.
Laura's like, there is no word for it.
I don't know that word. No, she's very, and again, I think taking into consideration that, again, going back, giving Hemingway some credit, she served in the war.
Mhm.
She is drunk all of the time or getting drunk all of the time. And I think there's this, Jeff, you mentioned it earlier, that she kind of like goes from man to man, and all of these men in her life are in love with her. They kind of allow her, they justify her behavior. They, in a lot of ways, they like enable it. You know, in the scene in book one where there's the Count who is completely in love with her and funding everything that she's doing, and like follows her around even when she's going to see other men, and like leaving her alone in an apartment with another man, but like they're supposed to be together, right? Like there's a lot of this, like everybody kind of looks at her behavior as, yeah, this is okay because she's so charming.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, untouchable. That's how as you were talking, that's how I describe her. She's like above the fray of everything. Yeah.
And she enjoys it too. Like
Yeah.
she loves having them all kind of gathered around her.
Yeah,
One
she
of the-
definitely likes leading Jake on. What were you going to say, Vince?
One of the things, before we get too far away from it, and the passage you read in chapter 2, what I found fascinating about that is it shows that Khan just gets obsessed with something, and that lays the foundation later for the ending of the book. But why I find that interesting is like the way I would have written it'd be like, oh well, there's Con and he's this obsessive man. But Hemingway shows us he's obsessive, and then the because we're seeing everything through Jake's eyes, Jake doesn't describe him as being obsessive. Like
Yeah.
in no way. It's only in the dialogue that we see Con is obsessive. And then later in the book, when we'll get to it, like Con just doesn't let stuff go. Like it's just his problem.
Yeah. Yeah, he just keeps holding on to it forever. Yeah, and unsatisfied, obsessive and unsatisfied, like just can't let go of things at all. Yeah, and but doesn't like anything he has. Like he's engaged to a woman who's horrible. Yeah. Should I read another section? Laura's like, no, don't. Okay, let's read a drunk section. So I don't know what chapter this is from. This is from chapter 18. This is, I think, after Con has punched them out. So I stood in the front door of Mike's room and knocked. There was no answer. I tried the knob and opened it. Inside the room was great disorder. All the bags were opened and the clothing was strewn around. There were empty bottles beside the bed. Mike lay in the bed looking like death, like a death mask of himself. He opened his eyes and looked at me. "Hello, Jake," he said very slowly. I'm getting lit till sleep. I've want ed lit till sleep for long time. Let me cover you over. No, I'm quite warm. Don't go. I haven't got 10 to sleep yet. And the words are like intentionally broken how I'm broken. That's not an internet connection problem. That's how he breaks them up. You'll sleep, Mike. Don't worry, boy. Brett's got a bullfighter, Mike said, but her Jew has gone away. He turned his head and looked at me. Damned good thing, what? Yes. Now go to sleep, Mike. You ought to get some sleep. I'm just starting. I'm going to get a little sleep. He shut his eyes and I went out of the room and turned the door quietly. Bill was in my room reading the paper. See, Mike? Yes. Let's go eat. And that's, standard Hemingway transition in this book. It's like, let's go eat. Let's get a cab. Let's go dance. Yeah. Anyway, how do we feel about Hemingway's drunk writing?
It's gonna let Laura tear into it first.
It wasn't me that time. It wasn't me.
To be fair, I did not read that scene. I hadn't gotten that far. That was further than I had gotten.
Yeah, I really hated that depiction of, because that's not how I would think more slurred and sleepy, and it's very like the way he chopped words like that, like the stutter, didn't really work for me. I don't know. I was confused. At first I thought they were just typos in the book. And then I was like, oh no, he's doing this. Then it happened for 2 lines. And I was like, no, he's doing this on purpose.
They already pointed out that it was grammatically well written.
Can't take that back.
Can't take it back.
Okay.
Yeah.
Most of it.
Yeah. It's funny. Yeah, any other thoughts on Hemingway's drunk writing?
He one of the things he had a lot of repetition when people talk.
Yeah.
And which I kind of like that. I think you're highlighting, he did a stylistic choice of trying to describe this drunk person on the bed falling asleep.
Yep.
Maybe it didn't hit the mark, but most of the time when he does it, the characters, basically you could summarize like 10 exchanges with like 2 exchanges.
Yeah.
And which I think is true to the way many people speak when they're drunk.
Yeah.
I think, but that might be a reflection of the way Americans speak, which is if the sender doesn't think their message is heard, you repeat it.
Mm-hmm.
So the onus is on the sender of the message. The receiver, the onus is not on the receiver. Oftentimes Americans don't ask for clarification.
Yeah.
And I think that's what you're seeing here.
Yeah. I was trying to think if I highlighted a section where they keep coming back and repeating, but I don't think I grabbed one right away. I have this one in chapter 8. It's too long to read though. It's where Bill keeps bringing up Vienna and he won't let it go. And he keeps talking about, sounds like Vienna. He goes on for pages. But yeah, anyway. Yeah, I totally agree, Vince. He's got that like repetition of like stretching out conversations that I think most of us in writing would sum up in like 2 lines, but they go on for pages and pages and pages. What did y'all think? So there's a weird change in style at the end of the book where typically you can't go a page without some kind of conversation happening. There's a place in, I think, chapter 14, there's no conversation in that chapter, but it's only like a page and a half. But then he gets to the end, to the big bullfight with Romero. And, Vince, like you were saying earlier, it's weird the details he focuses on and like what he's obsessed with. But there's all of a sudden for like 5 pages, there's no dialogue. It's just him watching Romero in this bullfight. What did y'all have any thoughts on that, or what did you think of that?
Well, I mean, like reading it, it was definitely vivid enough that I was cringing as I watched, for what was happening to the animals.
Yeah.
So it was vivid, and it did take me into the moment.
Yeah, it's great. It's super vivid writing. Although no blood, which was weird.
Yeah, I saw it in my head.
This is funny. Yeah.
Well, the way I interpret it was the Jake, the main character, he returns to Papelona all the time, and he stays at the specific hotel because he thinks it's the best. And he talks with Montoya, who's the innkeeper at the hotel,
Mm-hmm.
and they refer to each other as aficionados. And there's like the secret club of like bullfighter aficionados, and they kind of distinguish themselves from everybody else because they don't talk about gore. And like that's what I found fascinating, because they did, at one point he describes the bullfighter's brother stabs the bull, but there is no blood to it.
Yeah.
And he spends more time talking about the ear that was cut off and handed to one of the main characters, Brett. And that was such a big element to what Jake was interested in. And because he sets it up the whole time, because there's a stampede and Jake's talking with a waiter at one point, and the waiter's just like, oh, this is just like this unglorious bloodbath of a sport, and oh, the humanity. And Jake's just like, that's why I'm here. Like,
Mm-hmm.
but he's not here for the inhumanity. He's here for the craftsmanship. And the way he describes these scenes is the craftsmanship that he sees.
Yeah.
He only really does that another time when he describes the Basque region as he goes to go fish on his quick little excursion.
Yeah.
Like it's very rare that he spends a paragraph describing anything but dialogue, and then he goes into like a paragraph or a page or two of like scenery, and then a page or multiple pages of this bullfight.
Yeah.
So, but I thought he really set up the bullfight by describing Jake's personality, but I don't think he described the interest in scenery too well, and I had a hard time with that passage.
It's actually not that different from other places in the book. It just feels different because of the intensity of the scene. So, as someone who doesn't read anything between dialogue, there are actually, I shouldn't be so like definitive about that. I have a tendency to skim and or skip paragraphs that don't have dialogue in them. There were actually more of those throughout the book than I think we notice.
Huh. Yeah, I didn't notice them.
Because they are so mundane and the voice of them is so numb, to use the word Faye used earlier. It's not until the bullfight, and I think this is what Vince is talking about, though I think we have a connection issue with Vince right
Yeah, we may
now.
have lost Vince. We lost
Ooh,
Vince. He'll be
we
back.
did. But like what he was kind of seeing as the main character was describing the fishing trip, like we were starting to see some life from him, so it feels more like what we were getting at there, but the whole thing was leading up to the bullfight, so it's like this anticipation. And while I have not read the ending yet, it is my understanding that after the bullfight, there's kind of agreement amongst the main characters that there's this idea that this is kind of the first time we've felt alive since the war.
Yeah.
So, and again, that's spoiler for anyone who
Too
hasn't
late.
read the ending like I haven't, but that's what I'm kind of thinking is like, I think that there's more of that than we noticed as we were reading the early chapters.
Yeah, I 100% think you're right. Yeah. I think there's also something in here that I didn't quite pick up on, and I'm sure if you Google it, there's scholars that talk about it, but he seems to be playing with the concepts of manhood some. You've got kind of impotent out of it Jake, and then you've got these other male figures, and then it gets to this very like, the bull is a symbol of manhood being like killed and slaughtered for entertainment, and there's something going on there. There's multiple bullfighters you meet at one point. I think there's 3 of them. I'm sure if you wanted to do some kind of textual analysis that he's playing with something there. I just wasn't smart enough to pick it up on a read through.
I mean, Bill was very vocal about his love for Jake. And like this description of in America, I would have been deemed as a homosexual, and then compared himself to Lincoln and to someone else, and how they were like, right. So like, again, to that theme of manhood and masculinity, and how, and I can especially see that if we're talking post-war novel about sort of this impotence of an entire generation, where, and the difference, moving from World War I to World War II, and like how the world changed so much then.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'd forgotten about that passage. That was an interesting passage.
Well, see, this is the benefit of reading an entire book 2 days before the book club, is that you remember everything.
That's really funny. Yeah, it was a super slow read for me. It wasn't, I would get lost in it a lot. I'd actually be reading and find myself thinking about something else, and then have to like go back into reading it again.
And you couldn't read it quickly. You had to take your time
to spend time with it
to get, to get anything out of it.
Yeah. Hey, Vince, sorry we lost you. Welcome back.
Technical difficulties. We're talking about War of the Worlds, right?
Yeah, we've moved on. We've actually moved on to Tom Clancy. Just kidding. Yeah. Okay, so anything else? We've talked about characterization. We've talked about the use of dialogue. We've talked about the humor. We've talked about the drunk people. We've talked about manhood and bullfighting, and the odd sparsity that like the strategic focus in weird areas that Hemingway has. Weird areas. Not weird is a bad word for that, but I can't find a better one. Is there anything else anything else y'all want to bring up before we move to the final question of what can we learn from this as writers?
So go ahead, Vince.
I think one of the strangest things I saw was that just because like it was such a ping pong dialogue the whole time, there's this final scene at the bullfight where the ear is presented to Brett, and she's in the stands, and like this is in this um, in this culture, this is like a big thing to get. Like this is a very desirable thing, and like the crowd's going wild, and it's given to Brett, who's a British, and like she doesn't say anything, and it actually says that in the book where like she's quiet. It's
Yeah.
like the first time that somebody has not responded to dialogue.
Yeah.
It was really cool because it hit me like a bolt of lightning. Like just like everything's like simple ping pong conversation, and then bang, no response.
Yeah.
And I thought that was a really clever way to add a lot of emotion to not responding.
Yeah. That silence kind of beats at you a little bit
Yeah.
there at the end. Yeah. That's very cool. It's a great point. Anything else we want to bring up about the
One thing that struck me was that illustrated the depth of her relationship with Jake was when she got into trouble and got dumped to the bullfighter. He's the one she called for help. Like he's the one she said, come help me. And not her fiance. And, you know,
yeah. Although she's going back, she wants help to get back to her fiance,
yeah,
which is an interesting, yeah.
Yeah. Like it just seems like a really interesting relationship that they had.
Yeah. Torturous for Jake almost.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I didn't pick this up as I was reading the book, but as we talk about it, the character dynamics are very reminiscent to me of the New Girl cast. I imagine that someone way smarter than me in the New Girl writers room, but like you have Jess, who's this like untouchable Brett character moving from relationship to relationship and always coming back to Nick.
Yeah.
Nick being the drunk barkeeper who doesn't really have any ambition, but in the end ends up being a writer.
Yeah.
You've got Schmidt as his best friend, who's kind of like this Bill character. You've got these other men in the loft with them, right? Like, and this constant cast of characters all surrounding her.
Yeah, Coach is very Robert Kahn. Yeah.
Right. So like there's a lot of this, and it doesn't line up exactly right, but there's this, when we bring in, I can't remember the dad's name, played by Dermot whatever.
Ellen McDermott.
Yeah.
That's not it. It's actually the other one.
It's the other one, right? Like, again, like, I don't know. It's whoever it is.
Oh my gosh.
And, like the dad, like that dynamic between him and Nick is a lot of the same dynamic between Robert and Jake in the book. So my guess is somebody smarter than me has already figured this out, and it was like maybe pretty intentional. But as we're kind of describing the relationships there, it really felt very reminiscent to me.
That really freaks me out. I'm gonna have to go watch some New Girl now. To see how, yeah. It's Dermot Mulroney, by the way.
Thank you.
Yeah. That's the SNL sketch. Is it Dylan McDermott or Dermot Mulroney?
Yeah.
And I always,
I mean, they're kind of the same person. They've never been on the screen together at the same time.
It's
so
true.
Do we really know?
Super true. Except in that SNL sketch, I think they're on the screen.
I thought they were both played by somebody else.
They are. No, Dermot Mulroney is definitely there. I can't remember if Dylan McDermott shows up or not. People can go watch the SNL sketch. It's funny.
But if you want to watch a fun rendition of The Sun Also Rises, go watch New Girl.
Go watch New Girl. They also get obsessed about weird things. and
Yes.
like
Yes. And it like
there's
plays
also the
over and
like
over again.
bringing back of weird repetition, like not
Yep.
letting things go. Yeah, that's terrifying, and I have to. I will now go down a Google rabbit hole tonight.
Great. And when you find the answer, please share it with me so I do not also have to end up in that same rabbit hole.
I will sacrificially go down the rabbit hole
Thank you.
for
I
all of
appreciate
us
that.
and see if I can find anyone talking about New Girl and The Sun Also Rises.
I
Um,
mean, maybe we're like gonna trend because of that. I don't actually know what that means, but I know it's a thing,
maybe we're gonna hashtag because of that.
right?
We'll get the hashtag. Yeah,
On the
whatever that means.
Facebook
On the face,
and
on the book of faces
yeah.
with the tweets.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Anything else about the book that we want to talk about?
You said you had a big question to wrap up with.
Yeah, Vince, did you have something before I asked the big question?
Just one cool thing he did with the names of his characters, which was all of the main characters have like simple, normal men's names. There's but Brett, it's Lady Ashley is her actual title, but she goes by a different name. So what I think that allowed the reader to do is to substitute your version of Brett into the story to make her a little bit more believable,
Huh.
a little bit more of the person you know. Because if she was just Ashley, you say, well, I know an Ashley and she's not like that. Like
Yeah.
the most important character in this book is actually Brett in a
Yeah.
way.
100.
Because
Well, it all revolves around her.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's all Brett all the time. And so what Hemingway does is he has a unique name for this character. And so like, oh, well, I can kind of see kind of sort of myself as Jake, but I know my version of Brett and you can overlay that.
Yeah, it's really interesting.
Right.
Yeah.
Because Dilbert's boss does not have a name.
Yeah.
On purpose, because you can overlay your boss as being, oh, well, I see I am Dilbert and my boss is actually the pointy haired man.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's what Scott Adams accomplished with Dilbert. And that's what I think Hemingway did here.
Yeah. I think that I can totally see that.
Anyway, that's all I got.
Yeah. Okay. Last question. What as writers and editors can we learn from The Sun Also Rises?
Ooh.
Yeah.
If you want Laura to read your book, make it interesting.
Have a clear plot with twists, turns, and ideally some explosions.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Cars driving into helicopters.
That's right.
All like the normal stuff. I'm
Normal stuff.
Normal
Yeah.
stuff.
I'm just kidding. I also realize that I am not the target audience that Hemingway was writing for. I actually kind of think Hemingway was writing for Hemingway, and
Yeah,
the
that's
rest
what
of
it
the
feels
world
like.
just kind of happened to
Yeah.
stumble upon this work. But no, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I was just kidding.
No. Yeah, I totally agree with that.
Yeah, this does feel a little semi-autobiographical for sure.
Yeah. A journalist living in Paris who loves bullfighting, drinking, and has questions about masculinity. Writes a book about a journalist living in Paris who loves bullfighting, drinking, and yeah, little, and it is his first novel. And you know what they say: our first novel is always some form of fictionalized memoir. So, yeah, I think for me, Laura's gonna hate this. It totally encouraged me to lean more into the enjoyment of characters through dialogue. I think we feel this tension in modern writing to always be moving the plot, right? Like, oh, dialogue moves the plot, like that's the goal. But for Hemingway, dialogue's just about sitting with these people, and that I was encouraged by that. I was like, it's okay if I have a scene where I just sit with the people, as long as it comes off as engaging and you feel the people through the dialogue. Yeah.
I actually don't hate you for that. I actually think some of the best scenes that you have in your books are the moments where nothing is happening and your cast of characters is just
We're just
being
hanging out.
together.
Yeah.
I mean,
Thank
all
you.
the way back to Mencken, like the best scenes were Mencken and Rosie, you know, like just doing nothing. Chris and Jose just walking around the city.
Yeah.
In the Mo and Stacy books, like Mo and Stacy just being together, those transition pieces where you get to know your characters, I don't have any issue with.
I find those are the funnest to write too. Like those are the ones I remember writing. Like I remember very vividly writing. There's a scene where two of my characters are making fun of a third character's name, just to be a-holes. And I loved writing the scene so much, and I can still remember sitting there writing it. Like it's one of those moments where it's like, yeah, I like this moment, mostly because I felt like I was hanging out with the characters. And that's, I think as writers, we need to let ourselves do that more. Just hang with our characters and let them be themselves through dialogue.
Well, and the readers feel the same way, right? Like
Yeah.
we get to be there too. We get to sit at the table. We get to take the walk. We get to kind of be a part of it. I mean, even with Hemingway, like when his scenes with the big cast actually get to a place where they're talking about something, even though it's not important, it's not integral to the scene, it's like you're sitting at the table with them, where Mike keeps trying to get Jake to tell the bullfighter that bulls don't have any balls, right? Like over and over again. And then Brett gets into it and they're talking about Brett wanting to see the bullfighter without his clothes on. And Jake's trying to have some semblance of a normal conversation, but there's this chaos happening around them, right?
Yep.
Like that's actually where, it takes 145 pages, but now all of a sudden you have this cast of characters and you can actually see, oh, this is the dynamic.
Yeah.
This explains why when it's just Bill and Jake, they're like they are, or when it's just Brett and Jake, that's why they are, or like, right? It's because this is what happens when they all get together.
That's awesome. Yeah. Faye and Vince, anything you learned from The Sun Also Rises as writers?
Go ahead, Faye.
There's a lot of subtext in this piece that you don't necessarily recognize when you're reading it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like you have to like kind of ponder it, and there's a lot of art in that, but I don't know how you try to do that.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's why this is a masterwork. Yeah. If we could all. Yeah. Vince, what about you?
I think one of the points in this book that we didn't cover earlier, which was you had this scene where Bill and Mike, so Bill and Mike are both like just broke and bankrupt all the time. And they're always like mooching money. And Jake never describes this. But the thing was, Bill and Mike had not met before they actually got to Paloma. And when they first meet, they're just like, hey, how's it going? But then as the drunken debauchery continues, Hemingway leaves all the transition out, and you have like these scenes where Bill is like, well, these Englishmen, they came in the bar and they were talking trash to Mike, and no one should treat Mike like that. And so you see like the relationship has changed, but then Hemingway has not described the change. And he let the reader be intelligent to see that difference. Like he didn't talk down to us, and I really appreciated that. I'm going to try to remember that.
Yeah. I love that. Okay. Final question. Would you recommend somebody read this book? I'm a yes. I'm a yes. Read this book. If you're a writer, read this book. How's that? Faye, how about you?
I would say if you're a patient reader, read the book.
Laura?
If I say yes, that means you're going to pick more books like this.
No, oh,
So,
no,
for
totally not. Totally not.
self-preservation. So, the way that I would recommend it is if you have somebody to talk to about it, read it. If it's an individualized pursuit, I don't think that there's the value added as an individual. So like, as I listen to the three of you describe your experiences with the book and the perspectives that you're bringing to the table, I think it really helped me understand and find value in what I was reading. You know, Jeff, you and I had some offline conversations about the era in which the book was written, this understanding of expats post World War I, and how this is really like, it wasn't just Hemingway semi-autobiographically, however you translate that word. Again, I'm a great editor. You know, it's not just about him kind of telling his story, but it was also like a nod to what was happening in America at the time, which is why someone like me struggles with the book so much, because it's not just pure entertainment or just pure storytelling. There's a lot of like, I can't even think of the word now, but like commentary, that's the word I'm looking for. There's a lot of commentary on what was happening. So I think books like this that have that type of commentary are best discussed and enjoyed together as opposed to read. So I will say yes, but.
Yes, but I'll take it. Vince, how about you?
I would say I would recommend this book if you're Laura Hum to read the last 20 pages.
I actually will read the last 20 pages. Well,
You could,
I will read the dialogue in the last 20 pages because I only read the dialogue in the first 175. So
you can choose. I'll tell you what, you can choose. You can read the last 19 pages and you can choose the last page if you want to read it or not.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I kind of wanted
Yeah.
to choose your own adventure at the end.
I mean,
Where I could be
Jeff
like,
never,
does he get with Lady Ashley? For yes, turn to page 243. For no, turn to page 244.
well, I was kind of doing Jeff's thing where, like, if he really likes the characters, he doesn't finish a book. They just sit on the shelf with him, you know, just knowing that they're there. So
I don't want to say goodbye.
No,
Yeah.
actually, I literally ran out of time.
It's funny. All right, gang. Thanks for doing this. I'm going to turn off the recording and we can talk a
Do
little
you
bit
want
more.
to talk about the next book first?
Oh, yeah. Oh, I totally forgot. Laura is picking the next book
I get to
because
pick the
I
next
picked
book.
this one
And the one before it.
and I picked Beloved. And
And
both of those were traumatic.
They were
So.
too emotionally raw for me.
Yeah.
So we're switching up genre.
And she's terrified that I'll pick Infinite Jest next, which was the plot was written to a mathematical formula.
Again, Jeff, you can pick Infinite Jest anytime you want. I will just not be participating in that particular month or whatever kind of cycle we're working on here.
Okay, what's the next book?
Okay, so it is by an author named Tracy Clark. And it is called Borrowed Time. Unlike our other two books, Tracy is a newish writer. Borrowed Time is the second in a series. The fourth book will be dropping in June or July of this year. I have not read any of her work except for the first two chapters of two of her books. The reason that I have a tendency to start a series on the second book and then go back and read the first book is because oftentimes writers are trying to find the voices of their characters, and not to say that Tracy needed to find the voices of her characters in book one, but oftentimes I find that I enjoy the characters in book two more than book one because they know who they are, so I know who they are, and then I can go back and read the prequel. Also, I do things the way I do things. So anyway, Borrowed Time is about a former cop from Chicago turned private investigator who looks into a suspicious death as a favor to a friend.
This
I'm
is way
reading
more
it.
a Laura book.
Yeah, right? Like this is totally right up my alley. We've got a PI, we've got a murder,
That's
we've
right.
got suspicion, we've got enemies. Right?
Intrigue, twists. Yeah,
There's not going to be any subtext. There's
that's
not
right.
going to
You
be
totally read Toni Morrison and Interesting Me with me, so I will
not.
read Tracy Clark with you.
There's not going to be
Yeah.
any slavery.
there's no ghosts representing the past horrors of slavery hanging out in the house. Yeah.
Right? Like there's not going to be.
There's no lost generation drinking themselves into a melancholic depression.
There's
Yeah.
probably not going to be any bullfighting, right? Like it's just.
I mean, let's hope that there is.
I mean, maybe, but I have read the first 2 chapters, and I don't know. We talked about it in the last podcast about what makes me read a book, and if I'm not in by the first 3 pages, I don't bother. But this seems to be really a great book, and I'm excited.
Nice.
So,
I'm pumped.
Yeah.
Okay, so if you're interested in coming back, Faye and Vince, I hope you both come back for the next book. But if you want to jump on the podcast with us, we don't bite. I promise. We'll do it we'll record the first week of May. So grab the book. We got 2 months to read it.
Excellent.
Yeah, I promise not to do what I did with The Sun Also Rises and push it back a full month. We'll do it the first week of May.
Sounds like a
we
riot.
all needed that month.
Yeah. Laura needs another week. All right, gang. I'm going to stop
I don't
the
need
recording.
another week. I just need another hour. I just needed 1 more hour.